Joining us today is Matthew Bess. Matt, welcome and please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Matthew Bess, as you said, Carl. Thanks you for having me. I have a lot of experience with the Night's Watch, and to my understanding, you have some questions about it.
Yeah, I am interested in your personal thoughts and all of these changes because of your experience and your success with them. So, if you could share with us your background in wargaming and your history with Ice and Fire specifically.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm a long-time miniature player. I played Warhammer Fantasy and 40K for a number of years. And then when Ice and Fire came out, what was it, not last August, but the August before, I was introduced to the game that August or September, and I immediately fell in love with it. The game was great, and I played a bunch of games with Starks and Lannisters, and I got to the point where I burned out and was like, I'm going to buy the first faction that comes out that's independent, because I don't have all that money to buy two factions. The first faction was Night Watch, and I went in on it, and I loved it. So, that's how I got started playing the Night's Watch. And as people are very aware, up until the 1.5 changes, the Night's Watch were, they weren't unbeatable, but people found them to be very oppressive, and very mean, and very unlikable to play against. After the 1.5 and 1.1, I think they're a little bit more manageable. I'm still trying to suss out exactly what I want my eventual playstyle to be with them after the changes, because it's not like there's one individual change. They are weaker than they were before, I think, and then when you compare it to all the other changes that have happened, it definitely puts them in a more balanced place. They're not kind of autopilot like they were before, if that makes sense.
That's a good way of putting it.
So,
Which is healthy, I would say.
I would say that it's one thing I like about this game is that they don't reprint a rule book or make you buy another book. They literally have everything available on an app or online with updated changes. And they usually do changes every 3 to 6 months, which is very nice. So like metas constantly shift, and things come in more power and less powerful. And I think it's one of the things I like about the game, that they actually seem to care about the rules and keep things up to date.
Absolutely, I agree 100%.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So, how did you fare with Night's Watch competitively before 1.5?
I did fairly well. I won most of my games that I played competitively. I did struggle against some things here and there. Before 1.5, I never worried about Lannisters, and I only ever worried about Starks and other Night Watch players, and neutrals. But you see right now a lot of people running Lannisters, and people running Lannisters before, and I would face the competitive Lannister lists, and I would beat them. But then I'd run into a Stark player, and they would, they'd give me a run for my money. But most of the time, I would still win. I did have some good losses, though. At the end of the day, it does come down to dice rolls. I remember a couple games I've won and lost based on a single die roll. Somebody fails a counterplot. That's always disheartening. Or when, somebody, rolls 3 6s when you needed them to only roll 2 out of 8, you know what I mean?
Right.
Things like that happen. It's at the end of the day, there's less dice. That means that each individual dice is more important about how it's rolled.
Yep, you're right. So moving into the changes, and I'm going to start with the general design notes, because I really like how they did this, actually. Put in the design notes here with the FAQ. And the general design notes is the Night's Watch is intended to be an army consisting of many elite options, each catered to a specific battlefield role. further enhanced and customized by their assortment of attachments and NCUs. These changes work to enhance those themes and thus were primarily focused on the available attachments and NCU options for the watch. All right, that makes complete sense. What do you think?
I think so too. I think that after rereading some of these, I like the directions it's going, and I fully support it.
All right, first up, Bowen Marsh. How often did you use Bowen Marsh before these changes?
Oh, 100%. Two reasons primarily. One, his ability, which did not change, which I'm going to just talk about out loud really quick.
Go ahead.
When he takes a zone, he doesn't zone replace, which is a huge deal. He looks at the top two cards, you put one in your hand, and you put one underneath. Odds are, depending on the situation, you want one of the cards in your hand, and one you don't care about. It allows you to quickly cycle through your deck. More importantly, it's not a zone replacement, which is a huge ability. And having that for 3 points is a huge deal. Because a 3-point, even if he zone replaced, a 3-point NCU is huge.
Yep.
Because it's an NCU that's cheaper.
So design notes here. The cost increased from 3 to 4, as everyone's well aware. Bowen brought incredible value for his points. We chose to maintain his ability, but bump him to 4 points, rather than lessen his overall effect.
So I still feel that you can still take him, but he is no longer an auto include, which is what he was before. And that, I think, is a goal, something we're going to see continually throughout, is that we're trying to shake up the cookie cutter, the copy-paste kind of list mentality. Because basically every list would take like the same 3 things with maybe 1 or 2 variants, and that was the list. And that's going to become obvious when we get to the unit updates. We'll talk more about that. But this was one of them. You always took him because for 3 points, he was entirely worth it.
Oh, absolutely. He was so good. Okay, and he's still good. Next up is Jor Mormont, the Old Bear. Ability was reworked. So let's go over that. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do. So I believe he has 2 different reworks, because he has a rework on his commander card as well as a rework on his NCU card.
Yes.
So let's talk about the commander version first.
This one's talking about the Old Bear, whichever one that is.
The Old Bear is the NCU.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the other one once we get to it in the line.
Okay.
So, what it was before was when he claimed a zone, he influenced the unit. That unit counts as controlling every zone on the board for vows while he's attached to the unit, which is important because vows have the initial effect, but oftentimes you're more interested in the secondary effect for a lot of them. A prime example is, I cannot remember the name. It's the attack one where you make something vulnerable.
Sword in the Darkness?
Yes, I believe that is it. Let me double check. I just
plus 2 dice.
Sword in the Darkness. Yeah, I'm more familiar with what they do, not the names. So it makes a unit vulnerable, an enemy unit vulnerable. That's a great ability. That's awesome. You get plus 2 dice while you control the swords. So being able to say, you know what, you took the swords, that's great. I'm going to say that this unit also controls the swords. And so now I get plus 2 dice is a big deal. Because all of a sudden my Swarm Brothers get plus 2 dice no matter what. So even if they're down to their last rank, 2 dice is a big deal when you're getting down to the nitty gritty of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big deal. What he does now, I think, might be a little better. I'm probably going to start taking him a little more often in my games. So what he does now is he still influences. While influencing a friendly unit, it gains the following abilities based on what you control. If you control the crown, you only suffer 1 wound from a failed panic test, which is huge. Because even with, you still would lose 2 wounds from other attachment abilities and things like that, but all of a sudden, instead of losing 2 to 4 guys, you lose 1 is a very big deal. Let's see here. The money bag, after defense dice are rolled, automated block 1 hit. That one is okay. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it helps out to kind of help it because it's an elite army. You need to block your hits. As well as it automatically blocks a hit. So that means if you get hit with something that ignores wounds, well, you automatically block one hit.
You mean ignore saves?
Yeah, because it's a hit. So you just block a hit,
Yep.
just automatically. Although, to be fair, most things that cause wounds don't cause hits, if that makes sense. They're just like, take D3 wounds. It's not a hit.
Right. You're talking stone thrower and giants. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some other things. The mountain also just does D3 wounds, and that's fine. But it needs to be mentioned. Probably the best ability I see here is if you control the envelope. Cannot be targeted or affected by enemy tactics cards or NCU abilities. So, because you have an elite army, you're going to have less units on the field. So a lot of times people will take cards to shut off your unit abilities, to do various different things. And if you do this, all of a sudden it's like, you know what? No, Xerxes does not give me a -2. No, Walder Frey, I believe is his name? The guy in the chair?
Yeah.
You attach him to a catapult. Oh, the catapult shut off. I now attach this to the catapult. The catapult turns back on. Yeah, all of a sudden, an ability to turn off your stuff gets turned back on. Now, there are ways around this, of course, but it's an option, which is a very big deal. It is a way around things, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people will be trying to shut off your things. Now, to be fair, you can attach this. This might need to be FAQ'd. So, like, for instance, it says cannot be affected, targeted, or affected. So there are things that say, hey, get affected by this tactics card. All your abilities get shut off for the round. I'm like, cool. I now attach this card, and now I'm no longer affected by it? I think the answer would be yes in that case, but I think an FAQ is in order to clarify that yes, it is canceling the tactics card that was played 3 turns beforehand. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because it says, or affected by. So all of a sudden, if I'm affected by your tactics cards, I say no, I'm no longer affected by it, even if it was played 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah, I think targeted would be if something comes after Jor gets put down.
Correct.
And then affected by is if he comes later.
So that it's very good if that's the way it's ruled because it makes him reactionary as well. So that means it's like, oh, the stone thrower. Let's say I have 2 stone throwers. You shut off one of them. I immediately go ahead and turn it back on because now I can't be affected by it.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think it sounds right.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would like a clarification on how the tactics cards work. I think that's the correct interpretation, but I'd like somebody to back it up because people like to argue about rules, and I admit I am not the best. I sometimes forget rules if I don't read up on stuff. Anyways, I think this is a very good card. I think he's an NCU. I think that it's totally worth taking him, but it's going to be a 4 point. It's 4 points. It's going to be expensive and it sucks because for Night's Watch, you're an elite army and everything costs points.
But I think you're going to see him a lot because what we're seeing a lot of right now is Walders. So
yes, that was one thing I wanted to. One of the neutralists had Walder, and I looked at that list, that one LVO, and I was like, any list I brought, he would take this list and shut off like a quarter of my army with this one ability. And all I have for defense is a Varus, and I'm like, that's a 2/3 chance, but it's like, ask anybody who plays dice games like this. On a 3-up, something happens. That's great, but even if it was a 2-up, it's not consistent enough.
Right.
I need guaranteed stuff to happen.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about what is next? Donal Illinois. Well, actually, let's finish the old bear with the designer notes. With the change to Watch Captain, Jorah's overall impact was severely lessened. While reducing him to a 3 points was considered, this is not the direction we wish to take with the faction, so Jor was instead reworked. He now functions as a countermeasure to the psychological aspects of war facing the Watch, while still maintaining the overall Watch theme of various tactic zones control. So there you go, countermeasure. I think we're right about the affected by.
Yep.
And then moving on, we have Donal Noy, expert blacksmith. The ability has been reworked. We'll do the designer notes first here. We have Donal was simply too much of an investment for what he brought to the table, not only in opportunity cost but practical use as well. His bolster defense ability has been bolstered to make him the premier option for defense when it comes to the Watch, keeping with the role focus aspects of the faction.
Yes. So, because what happened before, he had an influence ability. So, no, I take it back. He had a zone replacement ability for 4 points.
Yeah, that's right.
Zone replacement was only the money bags. You replaced the money bags, and you attached his card basically to a unit to remind you which unit it targeted. It said that unit, until it attacks, gets +1 to all its saves, which on paper sounds pretty cool, except that it's only one zone specifically you get to replace, and it's a pretty important one for the Night's Watch, as well as most factions being able to heal. And for 4 points, it was a big investment. Now, he has 3 order tokens. When a friendly combat unit is attacked, after dice are rolled, you can get +1 saves, and the opponent cannot expend vulnerable tokens. This is a very good upgrade. I think it's totally worth 4 points. All of a sudden, it's a reactionary thing that you can do only 3 times, but you can take it and get +1 to the save and no vulnerable tokens. In addition to that, it's not Night Watch specific. So if you really want Flateman to have a 2-up save, you could put the Flateman on the board with him on the side, charge the Flateman up, and they would still have a 2-up save, unable to use a vulnerable token. Quite honestly, the biggest part about this is not being able to expand a vulnerable token. Although in conjunction together, it's important, because let's say you're attacked by something that has Sundering, and your Swarm Brothers with a 4-up save go to a 5. Well, now they go back to a 4, and you can't use a vulnerable token against them, which is a very big deal and helps with your sustainability. For 4 points, I think it's totally worth it.
I agree, and a couple of things to mention that come to my mind is combined with Fire that burns against the cold, you have 5 sources of negating vulnerable, which leads me to my second thought, which is bye-bye Roderick.
Roderick, he got a huge buff. I think he's still 100%.
Yeah, no, he's super cool, but it just makes me think like, oh great, if I see this list in my opponent's 2 lists, I'm not going to take the Roderick one.
Well, let's also be very clear about this. The NCU abilities, like, they're all very good, but you're not going to be taking 5 NCUs. You're going to take 3 at most, which, unless you take Crashter or an NCU Commander, is going to be 12 points. That's a quarter of your army. That's a lot of points.
All right, continuing on, let's go down to Corrin Halfhand, the Unwavering Ranger. The ability has been reworked, which I think one was just added. Oh no, it changed as well. So the designer notes. Sorry, let's go over the notes, and then we'll talk about the ability. So, while potent, Corrin's ability was tricky to properly utilize, and in worst case scenarios could be irrelevant for the entire game. Not only have we modified the timing aspect, but we've also given it a slight boost in how far it goes to shut down the enemy. You are sacrificing an NCU after all. In addition, Corrin has now gained an influence effect to represent being one of the greatest rangers in the Watch, which also now gives him purpose even if his sacrifice effect does not come into play. Thoughts?
So, let's talk about what it was before, and then we can talk about what it is now.
Sure.
So before, he only had one ability, Sacrifice for the Cause, And all it did was at the beginning of a round, you kill him, and an enemy unit may not activate. I think if I remember correctly, it may not activate. So it couldn't even take a token. It just sat there.
Correct.
So it was a really good ability, but for 4 points, you're killing an NCU. Most people just went meh. This one, it's still kind of meh-ish, but you might see some play or at least value in taking him an experience.
I love it. I want to play with him.
I think it's worth it. I just think that there might be better options. So now what it does is it's at the start of any turn if he hasn't been activated. So it's much more, instead of trying to plan things out at the beginning of the round, you can be very much more reactionary with it or just shut things down, especially because it's the start of any turn. So for instance, if your opponent does something like, and then all of a sudden it's like, cool, I got to do this, be like, hold up, I'm going to do a reactionary to shut that down. It's a very big deal. What I also like is that, let's say you never use the ability, he still has an effect with his influence, which is +1 to their movement and +1 attack die for infantry. So very interesting. It's just a +1 attack die, which means if I give it to builder crossbowmen, they now fire 8 shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a +1 to the attack die for everything.
My first thought was those hunters. Wait, was it hunters? Yeah, Ranger hunters. They'd make use of both of those boosts.
Yeah. Now maybe they'll FAQ it for only melee. I don't know, but as it stands right now, it's any attack. In fact, here's some shenanigans you can pull. You can attach it to a stone thrower and roll 2 dice.
Can you?
It's +1 attack dice.
So it doesn't have to be infantry?
Oh, it does have to be infantry.
Oh, okay.
Right. That is my fault. Still, though, they probably put it for infantry so that way you couldn't attach it to a siege weapon.
Yeah.
Very good chance.
Like a scorpion.
I would rather have it on a stone thrower because that way I can throw 2 dice in case everything
I
misses.
don't know. 3 hits per die on the scorpion is nasty.
Stone thrower feels better.
Yeah.
But yes, even then though, it's just like, hey, the +1 movement is also a big deal because all of a sudden your marches go a little bit faster. All your movements become faster. So when you have that charge that you're like, I need a 3 or 2 to charge, and I'm charging over a corpse pile, now you have a +1. And so now what was an iffy charge might be more safe to make the charge.
And also, key to note, combines with Watcher on the Wall Vow.
Yep.
I believe that's the one that gives the boost in speed.
I believe so, as long as you control the horses. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Free retreat, +1 speed, +1 speed from Corrin, and then it also you have John's +2 speed. I think it is. Is that right?
Yep. Yes, it is.
Bam.
Card. So you can speed things up drastically, which, like I said, it's very important. I think that's the end of the NCU updates.
Yes.
Okay.
Just a quick note. I like how everything is kind of working together here. Corrin's ability with something like Watcher combined with Jor Mormont. I mean, everything is looking a lot more. Instead of do I want to play this or this style, you can mix and match.
I think the more important thing is that you have options in what you can take, which was the whole point of the 1.5.1 update. Is that you don't cookie cutter. You're not taking one thing specifically, which we're going to talk about next specifically. We have to talk about this specifically.
All right. Next up, we're going into the units category, starting with we have already started units. Now we're doing combat units. The Swarm Brothers cost increased from 6 to 7, and the attack dice increased to an 8/6/4 profile. And the designer notes, Swarm Brothers have been at the top end of 6 points, given their specific combination of abilities and stat profile. The overall changes to 1.5 in both core rules and game modes compounded these combinations moving into the new version. While decreasing some of their capabilities and maintaining their points was an option, Night's Watch, by design, is meant to be an elite army. with a playstyle focusing on enhancing your already formidable units via vows and other synergies. Sworn Brothers being as cost efficient for their points as they were, while also being one of the cheapest options in the faction, took away from this aspect. Given all this, we have increased their point cost to 7, while in the context of the faction and 1.5 changes overall, we feel this puts them in a good place. We're also giving them a slight bump in combat value as well. All right, Matt, take it away.
All right, so as I said before, there was the cookie cutter aspect. It literally was the Swarm Brothers. I used to call them the Swole Brothers. So their ability. Let's talk about the whole unit as a whole before the changes.
The Swole. You say the Swole Brothers?
The Swole Brothers. They're swole. They're strong. So before 1.5, for 6 points, you had a movement of 5. You had 7, 5, 4 for the dice. You had a 4-up save, a 6 morale, critical blow, and sundering. So what you had was you had entire armies of this. 5 units of Swarm Brothers on the battlefield. Maybe a little variance here and there, but people were taking 4 of them base and just throwing it down people's throats. And with that stat line of, better than, the average morale is 6. 6 is good. 6 is better than good. I think it's a great stat line to have. A 4-up save means that even if you get hit with Sundering, you still have a 5-up. 4-up save is great. Their attack dice is great, but more importantly, critical blow and Sundering is huge. All of a sudden, I roll with the rerolls on 7 dice. I'm like, cool, here's 3 6s, and the rest of them hit. That's 7, 8, 9, 10 hits, and they're Sundering. It just clears trays. It was devastating. And that's the reason why they saw this cookie cutter mentality where you just saw Swarm Brother after Swarm Brother after Swarm Brother. So there was a lot of discussion about what changes could be made to Swarm Brothers in order to make it so people take other things. So, let us be very clear here. I think that I would have liked them to be nerfed and stayed at 6 points, but I am perfectly fine with them going to 7. I feel like they should get a little bit more for being at 7 points, but that's fine. With that said, though, they did need to be changed because, as I said, at 6 points, it was just the thing you took. At 7 points, at a 40-point game, you could still technically take 5, but then you're going to have 1 NCU and your commander somewhere, and that's it. And that changes the game drastically from what it was before. So all of a sudden you're not swarming the board with your Swarm Brothers. Quite literally, that's what it was, quite literally. That was the issue, is people were like, Swarm Brothers, Swarm Brothers, Swarm Brothers. Personally, myself, I would like to see another unit in between Swarm Brothers and Conscripts that kind of fills in the gap between them. Because honestly, I would like there to be a little more, but I think they're in a good place right now. I would like more for 7 points, but that's more of a personal preference because I feel they're on the low end of 7 at this point, if that makes sense. And as I've discussed with you before, I personally think the game should go up everything by 10, a factor of 10. So instead of playing 40-point games, you play 400-point games, and you can balance around that instead. So the Swarm Brothers wouldn't have been 6 points, they would have been 60. Well, they would have been like 65 or 68, if that makes sense. And it makes balancing things much better. But that's a personal criticism. The game changes as it does.
Yep, we've heard it before. It makes sense. I'm sure. I have trust in the designers, and there might be some issues with that, with whatever else is going on. So
honestly, that's probably a change for like a second edition kind of thing, which I think we'll eventually get to, hopefully. But that's gonna happen later. A prime example is X-Wing. X-Wing did the exact same thing. They doubled their point value, and they allowed them to rebalance everything further from there. Worked out great for them. I think it could work great for a Song of Ice and Fire. Their attack dice increase, I think, is also a great thing. Like I said, it definitely bumps them up to the clear 7 points. I still feel it puts them at the lower end. The biggest criticism I have for it is I still feel a lot of their other units are still kind of too expensive, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Like your Veterans of the Watch are A, your Ranger Trackers are A, and it's like if you really want people to use these units, they need to move down in points or have more things to offer, if that makes sense. We could talk about what the Ranger Hunters do because they're coming up next, but I feel that, like I said, we need to cover the Sworn Brothers. I feel that it's for any Night Watch player, they now have to relearn how to play the game, and I think that's just fine.
Yeah, I really love this change. I really do. I'm 150,000% satisfied, mostly because I only see them across the table.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think that the Sworn Brothers are still viable. I think that most Night Watch armies you see will most likely still want to take at least one unit of them. You don't have to, but you probably still want to because they're usually solid enough to hold the line against other people and still strike effectively.
Yeah, I
So
mean, talk about striking. They're still your powerhouse. All right, so you got 8 dice, Sundering, Crit Blow. You got things like Sword in the Darkness. You got Corin now is giving them +1 dice. I mean, these guys can lay it down still. There's
yeah,
no
but
question about it.
like I said though, there's changes in the fact that my standard list I ran before, basically I lost an NCU in the process. That
Hmm.
doesn't sound like much, but going from 3 NCUs to 2 NCUs is a pretty big deal.
Moving along to the next combat unit and the changes, the Ranger Hunters. Ability Opportunist removed. Opportunist was if you're targeting a unit that's not activated yet, you get to reroll dice. Order Quickfire added. Quickfire is a free attack, free range attack, I think, with a free maneuver or retreat.
Correct.
Design notes. Ranger Hunters should have a strong focus on maneuverability and positioning, but just weren't quite living up to that goal. By adding Quickfire, the unit is no longer a locked down as locked down as previous. This also allows them to better fill a take all comers role by having dedicated melee and ranged attack options. This comes at the trade off of losing Opportunist, but better defines their role in the army. All right, so go ahead, Matt.
So I think this is a very good change. I still think they might be a little too expensive at 8 points, but there are some interesting things you can do. So you look at their basic stat line. They move six. They always hit on threes, and they have 7, 6, 5 in close combat and at range. Their range is short, but with the quick fire ability, I can do a maneuver and then shift the fire. And then if I do get stuck in combat, I can always do after this attack is completed, I can do a free retreat. So you charge me or I charge you. After I do my attack, I do a retreat and then I shoot you. It's a very effective unit that has a lot of abilities. The one thing I criticize, it only has a 5-up save, which I'm fine with. Like I said, I just feel like 8 points for the 5-up save is a little risky because things can just blow it up pretty easily.
Well, then
Um,
take Donald Noy with you.
well, my thing is that I would consider taking Pip, the monkey.
Absolutely.
So it becomes a 10-point unit at that point. But at this point, you move them up, you do the charge, then you get your retreat action, and then you shift 6 inches around. All of a sudden, you open up on what people can and can't do. You get around people's flanks, the maneuverability. Like I said, the issue is if it's one of those units that it gets looked at funny and it goes away. Like there are,
It's like you got to think too hard.
yeah, most of the time, most units take 2 to 3 activations to get eliminated. But there are a couple units and situations that can kill a unit in one activation if the unit doesn't have a good save. This is one of them. Anything with a 5-up save or worse can be eliminated in one activation depending on what unit's facing them. So you have to be very careful about what's going on. Um, That
I would also say they can do the same against a unit with a 5 up save with their abilities going on.
Yeah, like I said, I think that this unit, I would like it to see it go to 7 points, but I think even then, though, the unit is a very strong choice. It does feel a little too expensive for what it is, but it's still a very solid choice that allows you to outmaneuver your opponent and maintain control of the battlefield. Um,
And you also have a quick note you have, which I don't have up right now. Alistair Thorn Commander. I'm gonna bring up real quick in my phone. Somebody pointed this out, a pretty good combo. So he has, first of all, he has at any cost, so minimizes damage from failed panic tests, and then he has Prey on the Weak with works with ranged and melee. So that's a +2 attack dice, +1 to hit, depending on how many ranks are gone. Pretty awesome.
yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, but that's as a defender, though. So it's like he's a second, he comes in second, is the issue. So this is more of an alpha strike unit where you want to take a free maneuver or maneuver them to the side and then shoot the side, and then you want to get to their side flank and then bounce to the back if you can. This is a unit that's you don't want to have just sitting out in the open. It's not a main unit, which is where I put Alisars in any unit that I want to hold the line.
Oh, okay.
Now, I think it's still good, don't get me wrong, but it relies upon, it's more like, okay, you have a rank missing, so now I do more damage, but I need to be hitting you with something that can hit really hard. If they were 7 points, I might consider it, but for 8 points, like I said, it feels like they're 1 point too many. So,
Another thing I want to point out is people think, like, for example, Pip. They're like, oh, well, the ranged attack is short range, so that doesn't really help much. And I want to say, well, you don't have to use quick fire on the unit you retreated from. So I was looking at like maximum distance. If let's say you roll sixes. If I charge in 12 inches plus an alignment to the other side of a unit, that could be let's just call it 4 inches. So that's 16. I hit and then I retreat. So then I'll roll a 6 again. Let's just pretend. So that's another 12. That's 28. Before I shoot, I can shift 3 with Pip. That's 31. And then shift again afterwards. That's 34 inches across the board. And when you shoot, you can target anybody you want. So.
yep. So my big thing is that going in with the bouncing in and out, so it allows you to actually, you're not going to hold the line with them, but they're fine being in the middle because what will happen is you could charge in, do your attack, and then do a free retreat action, and then shoot a target. Now, if you have Pip in there, what happens then is that you barely are at the 6 inches, and then you back up another 3 afterwards. So now you're 9 inches away from your opponent. Unless they have card play or something like that, most units move 5, they need a 4 to charge you.
Yep.
Which can be somewhat difficult to do in order to get that off. And that's assuming they're in the open. Or there's no walls or anything like that. There's nothing blocking them. Because it's easy. Like you fight on a forest, so I fall back, or you fight on a corpse pile, fall back, shoot them, fall back a little more. All of a sudden, they're at -1 inch.
Yep.
That said, though, they're not a unit that I would go toe to toe with any other unit. They're not meant to go toe to toe.
Nope. Nope. Of course not. Nope.
Like I said, it's something you bounce in and out of combat with, and you have to be very careful with them. It's not meant to hold the line, and that's fine.
Yep. It's totally fine. And I just thought of one more real quick on the hunters because I really enjoyed them when I had them. Is bouncing into, let's say, the crossbows of somebody or the bowmen. that are kind of behind the lines. These guys can go ping them and still back up enough so they ping them, free retreat. Then they can do their quick fire to somebody else engaged in the on the battle line. You know what I'm saying?
Now,
And then keep backing up. So you can kind of go behind lines and smack somebody, and
it's
then
not
back
even
up.
it's not even about going behind the line. It's about if I get the shot off, I get an extra 6 inches of move. So I get out of line of sight to somebody, I maneuver around, and let's say they get charged by something, that's fine. Even if they're on their last rank, 5 dice is 5 dice. And then it's like, cool, I attack you, I now retreat, and I shoot you. That's 10 dice flying at somebody.
Yep.
Granted, depending on what it is, it might not hurt them that much, but a lot of armies are not, 10 dice is not something to laugh at. Even with the 3-up save, 10 dice coming at you, hitting on threes, you're going to get 7 to 8 hits. You're going to fail 2 or 3. I mean, it's only 2 or 3, but it's about, at that point, the unit's already probably whittled down a little bit. Even if it's not, most things with a 3-up save usually don't hit that hard. There are exceptions, like the Flakeman, but most things with a 3-up save are more about sitting on an objective and holding the line.
All right, let's move on because we could probably talk about hunter combos all day.
Yeah, there are more important things to talk about.
Yeah. So next up we have the conscripts. The ability uninitiated is removed, which is huge,
Yes.
and ability insignificant added, which is huge.
So, with that said, let's talk about what the unit is as a whole. So, it moves 5, it hits on 4s with 7 dice and a couple others, 5-up save, 8 morale. The big thing, the big selling point for them is when the unit activates, they heal D3. If you control the money bags, you count as rolling a 3. Now, with that said, now they can take a vow, which is a very big deal because vows, you like the first portion, but it's often the second part, the attached value of the vow, that really brings people in and makes people excited about it. Like being able to get a free retreat and then charging with +1 inch, or getting +2 dice, or etc. It's a big deal. It's not that big, but it's big. The more important update is definitely the insignificant.
Holy
All of a
moly!
sudden, you have a unit that is not worth a victory point to your opponent. So unless you're playing a game mode where they can stack victory points on stuff, which happens, you don't care. You just throw them out there. Even if they do, so what? They have to focus that and do that with it. So quite legitimately, you can make a Night's Watch swarm list that can fight a free folk list on pretty much even numbers at that point, which is very surprising, I might add. So you can easily take 4 of them for 16 points, which is amazing.
That is amazing. I didn't think about that.
So I actually wrote up a list. It has some variants I might have to change a little bit, but basically it's 4 conscripts, 2 stone throwers,
Oh no!
Varus, and the builder as an NCU commander. And it's basically a stone thrower list where I just throw stuff at you and the conscripts block while the stone throwers do work. I feel that it is quite effective. I would consider switching out Varus for Mormont now, because Varus is simply there for a defensive ability, so that way the stone throwers can always do their thing. But it depends. But even then, though, with the builder, his cards help out the conscripts so much, because they're like, cool, now you have critical blow, now you have sundering, now you have vicious. I mean, all of a sudden, this weak little unit does all this extra stuff, and it's amazing. And like I said, it's not worth anything. It's insignificant. But yeah, in general, I would not be surprised if you see more armies out there that take at least 1 unit of conscripts as fill, as well as the fact that it's just they're a solid unit that can sit on objective.
Which can also combine a significant with, and now his watch has ended, which I'm gonna pull up because I don't have it memorized. But it's one of those awesome cards. Do 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 do. I'm gonna delete this part. Here it is. When a friendly combat unit is destroyed, you don't get a VP, haha, and you may return one attached Val card from that unit to your hand, which now triggers with conscripts, and then remove one activation token from a unit or NCU.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
But all of a sudden, that chaff unit got destroyed, lets you reactivate another unit, which is very important.
Yep.
And like I said, it has natural sustainability, and I think it's an overall solid unit. I would consider taking it now mainly because of insignificant.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
The both abilities, well, both changes, I'll say, is absolutely insanely awesome. You're gonna see lots of conscripts out there.
Yeah,
Um,
like I would not be surprised if you saw an all conscript army or like 2 to 3 conscripts. I play tested a 3 conscript army the other night. It did very well.
mm,
It held the line very well, and like, okay, cool, I'm gonna kill it. I'm like, cool. It's not worth anything to you, and it held the line just fine. Granted, it is one of those vulnerable units that can blow up in one activation
yep.
if
Yep.
something
That is true.
hits it hard. But the thing is, it's no longer worth a point to your opponent, and because it can hold a vow, you can now plan it out. So, like you said, I return the vow to my hand. So, like, I play the vow, you kill the unit, I now return the vow to my hand.
Yep.
Absolutely huge.
Yep.
Because that way it allows me to cycle through my vows faster.
Yep. And we didn't read this real quick. The conscripts is the design notes. The conscripts lived in a weird spot in an army focused on elite units and the Valve mechanic. We removed uninitiated to better allow the unit to play with the actual faction mechanics. Meanwhile, adding insignificant solidified their cheat filler role in the army while keeping the focus on the more elite units. So yeah, it makes complete sense. We're just going to go ahead and move on to build our crossbowmen here.
Okay, so let's
The-
read the designer notes first.
Okay.
Basically, it's an errata.
Mm-hmm.
It corrects the wording error with it because it's only intended to be triggered when you get charged from the front and has been corrected to reflect that. So if you read it specifically, it is only when they are being charged from the front arc, which means that the unit would line up in the front. Not that you can see it in the front, but if they would line up in the front in your front arc.
Right.
Make sense?
Yep.
In addition, you can only shoot at that unit. So what that means is that I can't back up, pop a shot at another unit, and then back up further or do something else. It's like, no, you can only shoot at the unit that is charging you, which is what I feel is intended.
Yep. They're a little too crazy before this errata.
Yes.
All right. So that was just short and sweet. Let's just move on because that was.
This one is bigger. This
Yeah.
is coming up.
Oh, yeah. All right. So next up we have Ghost. Ability Silent Predator has been reworked, and ability Uninitiated has been added. The design notes here is that Ghost was overperforming for his cost, which is factored into Jon Snow. We've kept the shut off abilities portion of Silent Predator, but removed the ignore defense saves aspect. Also, while he is a good boy and mentally bonded to Jon's psyche, Ghost never officially took his vows, so we've removed his access to them.
So this goes into what I was saying, the cookie cutter list before. The commander you took with the 4 or 5 Sworn Brothers was always Jon Snow with Ghost as your commander. And so what happened is, I think Ghost with his ability, with his turning off cards, I know people complain about it. I think it's working as intended. Most armies out there, I think the Baratheons are the only exception at this point, have an ability to prevent native to their army or their deck to shut off cards. And I think even the Baratheons are getting in their new hero box are getting NCUs and guys that allow them to shut off cards. It's a very important standard ability that exists. If you look at the Night's Watch, their native deck does not have it. They have no ability that does it. There are only 2 sources that exist for them that shut off card abilities, and only card abilities, I might add, because different things that shut off cards also shut off orders or abilities or other things going on. This only shuts off cards. One is if your Mormon is your commander. If there is a vow attached, the unit strikes at its highest value, and your opponent cannot play cards or orders. Afterwards, you remove the vows and they go away. And the other one is Ghost. And Ghost is very specific because the way Jon Snow works is that Ghost can activate before or after Jon Snow. So what you do is you activate Ghost, he charges in, he bites somebody, and then your opponent cannot use cards. And that affects whatever Jon Snow does at that point, which is very important. But besides that, though, Night's Watch have no way to deny cards, which is a very important aspect of the game, being able to deny what your opponent's cards can play. So with that said, I'm a little saddened by it, but I'm okay with this. Not being able to take a vow is important because it might be a little overkill. Because what was happening before was he ignored, his hits ignored, basically did direct wounds. And then what people were doing is they were taking Swords in the Darkness and controlling the sword. So all of a sudden he gets 4 attacks. And they did it multiple times and would just kill anything on the board because he hits on 2s. And they would just be like, cool, here are 3 attacks over 2 rounds and your unit dies. And it's like, okay, there's nothing I can do here. Because if he hits on 2s and ignores saves. You know? So it makes me, like I said, I think that I kind of wish he would have kept one or the other because it was nice for him to have a vow. Being able to take a vow. He can still be targeted by vows, but he can't take a vow, which was kind of nice because it allowed you to do some of the extra stuff. But, I think not doing the wounds is probably the biggest thing. I think it was the biggest complaint people had was here is this dog that did this thing. Actually, the biggest complaint was not necessarily that the dog did that. It's the fact that the dog didn't die. That's something to one of Jon Snow's cards.
Yeah.
I would hope that if they changed that card, they would buff the entire army or at least Jon Snow in general. Because basically you're like, cool, you take, I forget the name of the card, but basically...
It shall not end?
Yeah, it shall not end. You play it when a unit dies, you take a morale test. If you pass, the unit survives with 1 wound remaining. If it's within short range of Jon Snow, you remove the activation banner. So Ghost effectively becomes an unkillable speed bump that just sits there. And it's like, because he has a 2-up morale. So unless you could somehow morale bomb him, it's like, I'm just going to sit here and just be fine, and you can't do anything about it. And it sucks. It really does.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I think
that's one of the things that we unfortunately didn't mention in our NPE podcast last time was It Shall Not End. That card created so much frustration.
It is probably one of the most broken cards in the game. It is probably one of the reasons why the Night's Watch even got the Swarm Brothers even went to 7 points. Because we bring up the Ghost example, but I've literally won games because I had a unit of Swarm Brothers that were sitting on a wear tree just not die. Be like, cool, I have 3 units going into me. I play the card, and I'm like, cool, I passed the morale test. Now I have a panic test. I passed that.
And then now you have Jon Commander, so you automatically heal from the morale test pass.
Well, it could be Jon Snow, it could be anybody. But I just have it sitting there. It's like I have a guy sitting there on an objective that you cannot maneuver onto. He just sits there and he doesn't die.
All right. We can talk about this one all day as well. And I will put in a little advertisement note here. The next podcast after this one, you will hear a lot more on tactic cards. So keep an eye out for that. And we're going to move on here. All right, folks. So moving on to the last segment of our 1.5 updates. I know it says 1.5.1, but basically 1.5 as a whole. Attachments is our last category here. Jor Mormon is first up, the 997th Lord Commander. The ability Oath of the Black removed, the ability Stalwart added, and the ability Will of the Lord Commander added. The design notes here. Jor, as a commander, was not performing his role as inspiring leader of an entire organization, so has been given some new tools to assist in that role. Mechanically, he should also have a strong focus on vows, which his new abilities enhance even further. What do you think, Matt?
So I like him overall. So his ability before, I'm trying to remember what it was. If I remember correctly, he just had one ability that said that you can take a vow from your discard or hand and attach it to him, which is an alright ability, but once again, with vows, you want both parts. You want the first part and the second part. Oftentimes, the first part's more important than the second part, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Now, with the rework, I feel it's much better. So they threw that ability out, and now he has Stalwart, which is +2 to morale test, which is a very big deal. So, with the way Panic got reworked, Panic tests are a bigger deal and not as big a deal as they were before for certain armies. For free folk, panic tests aren't as big of a deal. You can afford to fail panic tests left, right, and center. It's not that big of a deal because at most you're going to lose 4 guys unless your opponent has attachments. And even then, though, it's like, okay, I lose 6. Meanwhile, morale elite armies like the Starks, Berserkers, or other things where they have a morale of 4, if they fail by 1 point, they're losing 2 to 4 guys, which can be a very big deal. A very big deal. I mean, a perfect example is if you hit one of the dogs. A dog has a 2-up, but let's say it's next to a corpse pile, and now it's a 3. You force a panic test on it with the crown. If it fails, it auto dies because it's taking D3 +1 wounds. So the +2 to morale is not as powerful as it was before, but it's very powerful still. His second ability, I think, is a little bit stronger. Will of the Lord Commander. He can have 2 attached vows, which is a great ability. More importantly, he always counts as controlling all zones. So for a Night's Watch player, the tactics board is very important to control which zones at certain times so that you can do certain abilities. Of course, the issue is that sometimes your opponent can be like, well, I know that you have Shields of the Faith of Men, block D3. I'm going to take the money back so you can't get it this round. And you're just like, well, this card does me nothing. With him, you don't care about that. You don't even have to put an NCU on the board. You automatically can count as controlling it, so you will always block D3. You always count as controlling the crown, so you can just pass out tokens when the unit activates and not remove the card. You always control the sword, so you always get +2 dice. So it's a very, very strong ability, and I think it brings him into light that he's actually worth taking. I think there's things we can talk about with commanders overall, but I think it's a big boost, so that way he's actually worth taking.
He might fit in with a conscript swarm kind of stick in the mud denial list kind of thing.
Well, I would say that, but he would fit in just about any list.
That's true.
We could talk about list building in detail if you'd like. We could do several talks about that because there are several aspects ranging from how to build the list to how to deploy to how to do all that stuff that we could talk about.
All right. So for now, let's move on to the Half Hand, the Grizzled Ranger. Cost reduced from 3 to 2. Design notes. While his combination of abilities justified his cost in a lot of armies, Night's Watch has expensive units meant to be further augmented with a variety of attachment choices. Here, the 3-point commitment was really showing. While this keeps him on the strong end of 2, it is still reliant on the specific unit he is placed in to be overly effective. So what does Half Hand Grizzled Ranger do again?
So he does 2 things. One, he has an order. When this unit passes a panic test, one enemy engaged with the unit suffers D3 wounds. So it's straight up wounds. So if a giant hits you, you're like, cool, go ahead and take D3 wounds so I pass the panic test, which is a big deal because it just bypasses its ability. More importantly, in my mind, is go down fighting. Each time a rank in this unit is destroyed, one enemy engaged with it suffers a wound. If you control swords, deal D3 instead. So all of a sudden, you have a unit that you want to put out and you actually want to get hurt and take tests with it consistently. And then as well as you don't mind if it loses ranks. So in my mind, going from 3 to 2 is fine. I want it in units that will consistently pass morale tests, as well as units that, like I said, when they lose a rank, I want them to hit and then I can heal them back up. So I'm thinking either conscripts or I'm thinking veterans of the watch.
Ooh.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, I'm going to pass that morale test with the veterans consistently, and I'm just going to do D3 wounds. If on the conscripts, I can lose a rank or two, and then I can heal back up. There is a question I have, I believe, with Go Down Fighting, is that if I'm eliminated, so my last rank is destroyed, does the ability trigger?
Yes.
Okay. So it's very important. Also, if I lose 2 ranks, does it trigger twice?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's great. So it does put priority on the swords, don't get me wrong. But that also forces my opponent to take the swords before I do. So that way, when they go in to engage the unit that has him, they're not doing D3 wounds. Because once again, it's D3 wounds, not hits. So the giant just takes D3 wounds. The flayed men take D3 wounds. It's just straight up wounds, which is a very important thing.
Indeed. And if they are going after those swords first, lets you take that coin purse for
Yep.
for your
Yep.
conscripts. Man, I like conscripts so much.
Conscripts got a huge boost overall.
All right, let's move on to Alistair Thorne, Vindictive Overseer.
This is the non-commander version, I might add.
Correct. The ability Incite removed. Ability Vicious added. Design notes. Alistair brought some of the only methods to modify morale and panic to the faction. He did this, however, at a fairly steep cost to the unit, despite the potential for healing with the Night's Watch. Much like Khorne, these benefits would be a boon to most factions, but given the makeup of the Watch, other options, or just excluding him, outshined. While we have removed Insight, Alistair now grants Vicious to his units as a flat buff. One of the only methods to gain panic-focused abilities in the entire faction.
Which is very important. Because before, it was kind of the same thing, but it was an order. So it was both good and bad. It was one of the few units in the game that had 2 different orders on it, which is always confusing to people. Because I put the order token on, and it's like, well, what order is that for? And things get shifted around, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what order was it used for? Now he only has 1 order, which is great. So his first ability, pass the test, perfect. It's a great ability. Let's focus on the change, though. So before, once per round, he gained Vicious, and you strike at the highest dice value, but you suffer D3 wounds. In general, you would either use this when you were at full strength, or you were about to die anyways. Which is good, but it limited that the ability was ever being used in general, as well as it's often viewed as a hindrance. Now, I don't have to worry about triggering anything. I'm just natively vicious, which is very important because panic tests are more important now than ever. Because even though you don't necessarily lose as many models as you used to, forcing an opponent to fail a panic test is more important than ever to help clear off a couple models.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting. That's a whole nother can of worms, but overall, panic is more important. It does do more damage on an average basis across a game.
Yep.
Right? You can't panic bomb anybody, but adding Vicious to a unit is really good, especially with the ability to remove activation tokens, take the swords and do multiple vicious attacks in a turn.
Yes. Being able to do that's very important.
Yeah, so Vicious is awesome. That's a great buff for Alistair. We're going to move on to the Watch Captain. This is one of my favorite changes. Order cost reduced from 2 to 1. ability, and now my watch begins removed. Order, Oath of the Black added. Design notes. Again, returning to the theme of role focus. These changes were made to allow the watch captain to manipulate and play with the vow mechanics better. I completely agree. Watch captain's amazing now.
Yeah. Let's go over what it did before. So for 2 points, it did two things. One, it allowed you to have two vows, and two, at the beginning of the game, you draw three cards. If one of them was a vow, you may attach it to the unit and shuffle the others back in your deck. The two vows was great. Because like I said, once again with vows, you want the beginning part of the vow as well as the bottom part, and just pre-attaching it was kind of like meh. More importantly, it was 2 points. Quite literally, nobody took this. This was not a takeable unit. You would just be like, why the hell would I take this attachment? This is not a good attachment to take for 2 points. I have other points I could spend elsewhere. 100%. Now, with the point reduction, I would be willing to take it. He could still take two vows, but more importantly, once at the start of any turn, you could be, so for the more reactive things, it's harder, but you're like, I control any zone. So for the money bag one that blocks D3, it's a little harder to time out. But when you go into attack with it, when you're going to activate the unit, you're going to be like, well, I have the one that lets me do a free retreat. So I'm going to do the free retreat now and then do this, and then do a charge elsewhere. I'm going to get an extra two attacks, or because I have this, I now can count it as controlling the envelope, which allows me to fish a card out of my discard or elsewhere and attach it so I can use that card instead. Very strong ability. But as I said, it's very hard to time it in a reactionary sense. It's doable, but I would use it primarily if I had the envelope vow, the sword vow, or the horse vow. The other two is too hard to consistently do. But it's a great ability, totally worth taking for 1 point. 100%.
100%. And last but not least, the Scorpion modification brought to the table as long as you have Othel Yarwick. The order cost reduced. Well, this is worded weird, but the modification itself was reduced from 2 to 1. What it brings to the table is the order, which is that's worded really weird. Are you reading this too?
Yeah, let me look at it because let me see here.
It says the order. It says the order cost was reduced. Well, the whole modification was reduced from 2.
So it's not. Here's the reason why I think it's technically an order. I think because here's the thing.
Well, it does two things.
Hang on. It's classified under attachments, but it's not an attachment because you can never attach an attachment to a siege weapon.
Right.
So it is not an attachment. It is a unit upgrade. So it's still under the attachments part, but basically they're lowering the cost from 2 to 1 point.
Right. It's just weird how the FAQ has it worded because it also gives you rapid reload, which is awesome.
Well, the only change that happened is it went from 2 to 1 point.
Right. It's just the way it's worded here on the FAQ is it says the order reduced from 2 to 1. Well, it's not just an order; it's rapid reload too, which is really good.
Technically, what they're saying is that the unit upgrade is an order, but the problem is that order is used elsewhere in the game mechanics, so it confuses people.
Okay. Well, anyways.
It's not an attachment. Does that make sense? Because they've been very clear about this. You cannot put an attachment of any kind on a siege weapon.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So, anyways, cost reduced from 2 to 1. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a buff of life upgrade because here's the thing: the siege weapon itself is pretty good. The Scorpion is great. The issue is that it's hard. It was hard to take without this because it couldn't shift before shooting. So all of a sudden, at a long range. So all of a sudden, you had to be there beforehand. And the problem with that is there are so many things in the game that can move out and get to you if at that range. Like there are so many ways to get a free maneuver or do whatever you want. And even if you do shoot, if you choose to shoot, guess what? You can't shift, so you're stuck there. So the thing is that if you took this, it was basically viewed as a vital upgrade. You had to take it if you were going to run bolt throwers. But it made the bolt thrower 9 points, which was considered too expensive. Because what the upgrade does is it does two things. One, if you take the horse, you can use it as a free ranged attack instead.
Awesome.
More importantly, however, it had stand and shoot, or whatever the ability is called. Where if
Ready,
you
ready,
charge,
aim, fire. Yeah.
if you get charged in the front, you get a free range attack. So unless they had something, a bolt thrower fires 3 shots hitting on threes. Every hit counts as 3 hits. In addition, it had sundry. So unless they had like a 3 or 4 up save, things just shied away from it. They weren't going to charge it. They were like, we're going to stay the hell away from this thing and try and get to the flank and try and let it plink me down. I mean, granted, like there are often times where it's like, I'm going to get there and charge you, but you got to fire first. And if you can get even 1 rank off of that, like for instance, let's say the Knights of the Rock. The Knights of the Rock charge. If you can get that Knights of the Rock down by 1 rank, the bolt thrower can survive. Then you come in and charge on the side, you can clear it, and then the bolt thrower is 3 to fire again. Because you have to remember, siege weapons do not take morale tests. If you want them dead, you have to go in and actually kill them.
You got to get them dead.
So I think it's a buff of life thing. And I think it's appropriately costed. I think that it's considering all the things that have happened. I think that it's a big boost.
Yep, and that's what I was just going to bring up to end our lovely chat here as sort of a segue into final thoughts. Is we've seen little buffs like this throughout all of these changes, and I just wanted to say that I love all the changes overall as a whole. Because you gotta take the nerfs where they're needed on the chin, and then appreciate the buffs. So, what are your final thoughts, Matt?
So I think overall it was all the changes. I feel that some of them are necessary. I think some of them are more reactionary to the community, and I think it's fine. I think as the game moves forward, they're going to continue to buff and nerf things as they see fit, and I think it's fine. I think that for the Night's Watch players, you're going to have to relearn how to play your army, because for the longest time, your mainstay that you always took at least 1, if not 2 or 3 Swarm Brother units. And now it's in the question about how many you take. It's a much more elite army now, which is what it's intended. I think there's plenty of options for you to do different things. Like I said, my personal opinion is I would like a unit that can take a vow somewhere in the 5 to 6 point range that's not conscripts.
Well, you just want everything, Matt.
I want, like I said, on my mind, I would like a unit that's somewhere in between, because if you look at most base factions, their core unit that comes in their unit box, or their core unit that they use, is usually either 5 to 6 points. The exception is Free Folk, but their raiders, you take 2 of them for the price of 6 points, so it's still 6 points. But if you look at it, a lot of these units are in that range, and the Night's Watch don't have anything like that, especially out of their base starter box. So all of a sudden, you have something that's not.
I think
completely different.
I think we're going to see a shift of what you call a base unit into conscripts.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things. I think that Watch can still be good. I think they can. They're not. I think they're more balanced now. I think they can still win games. I think that we're going to see overall what's going to happen. I would like to see, like I said, I would just like to see more units. Like I said, I feel like the point balance cost in all of their units is a little wonky still. Like the veterans, I think, are fine at 8, but the ranger trackers, I feel are a little iffy at 8 points.
Oh, the hunt.
Um,
Oh, the hunters. Yeah,
yeah, the hunters, the ranger hunters.
they're great. Just get them on the table. Do some
For
damage.
8 points, it's a lot. It's a lot to hit 8 points. Not including attachments. They're all about, hey, you need to put attachments and stuff. I put the proper attachment in there. That's a quarter of my army on something that just vaporizes. That can vaporize if I'm not careful with it. And yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of things going on. I think overall the art, it's in a the faction is in a good place. I do feel that there could be some buffs, but overall I feel that the buffs I would like to see are in units coming out for the faction. Specifically, the only one I'm aware of that's coming out is Nightwatch Hero Box 2. I would like to see the abilities at some point when that comes out. I think it's coming out in 3 to 6 months.
Wouldn't we all, Matt? We love those.
That,
We love those teasers.
like I said, it's just that's what I feel is needed. They just need a little bit more, but I think that's fine. I think like most factions, they need a little bit more. I'm specifically talking about Baratheons in this case,
Oh yeah.
and they're getting that fixed with their hero boxes. You know,
Hopefully soon.
supposedly this kind of pisses me off though a little bit. They're not releasing both at the same time.
Let's not digress.
It's ridiculous because each box is only for one of the factions. But you're right. We're digressing.
Yeah, I'll probably cut that out.
No,
Um,
don't censor me.
I I gotta censor the Matt.
All right.
Dude, it's been a pleasure. I love picking your brain, Night's Watch, since you've been so successful with them and you're all about them.
Yeah, I need to get
Um,
some more games in. To be honest, I'm probably going to be trying to play some more, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think that the Night's Watch is still a very good army, but like I said, there's changes coming down the pipe. You know what I mean?
yep, I'm very scared of them. Still, especially coming up in my league, I'm running here in the Northern California area. We'll be running a 50-point league, so you get some more list building options for those elite units.
I would take two stone throwers, 100%. I would just take two stone throwers and just support it that way. I don't care. It'd be like you're running free folk. Here's two stone throwers. Unless you're running all giants, and I'm like, go ahead and run all giants. I still have 20 points plus NCUs to counter your all giant list.
So I was just gonna mention to look out for some battle reports coming when I start playing some league games, as well as some more in-depth chats about the best and worst tactic cards out there right now, which will also be coming up in a future podcast. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Matt, for coming on and chatting.
Yep.
Any goodbye words?
Yeah, just the biggest thing is just get out there and play games, have fun. It's a fun game. It seems like the designers actually care about it and are constantly updating the rule set. So don't get disheartened if you're like, oh, well, my faction's not that good now, or it's too powerful, or whatever. Just be like, listen, eventually this is all going to come around. Things change a little bit. It'll be perfectly fine.
I 100% agree, and will just note that I like to think of it as a new puzzle. You get another game now, right?
Yeah.
That you got to figure out.
Oh,
And
100%.
yeah,
And then let me know if you ever want to talk more about list building in general, because I have lists of things I can talk about with that. There's a whole method, that you can apply different ways to build lists. So
absolutely. Well, I'll try to squeeze in as much as I can. Once again, to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you for helping keep the peace.